I want to shift just slightly to talk about hair loss. I know that on your podcast, you've done several parts in terms of what are some of the contributing factors to hair loss. And I wanted to talk about this from we've been talking a little bit about PCOS and how we might, as women, we've talked about hirsutism and we've talked about certain forms having maybe insulin resistance, some forms of PCOS not having insulin resistance. But what we also see both in men and women is when we have androgen excess, we were talking about this with DHT earlier, where we can see the individual, let's say the localized effect of DHT. If we have too much of it, let's say in the hair, in the scalp and in the hair follicle, that we can see male pattern baldness at least. And I wanted to, I've heard you talk on your show about kind of the different types of hair loss. And I thought that this would be a really valuable to understand both the different types, because women can also experience male pattern baldness, let's say. And then so we have that kind of hair loss. And then there's also just natural hair loss, or a different type of hair loss that happens. And I wanted to maybe give you the opportunity to sort of walk us through some of the different phases of hair growth and shedding, and then some ways that we might think about optimizing that or preventing it, I should say.
Yeah, there's obviously many types of hair loss that we don't necessarily need to get into. For example, immunogenic hair losses, like autoimmune diseases causing hair loss. But kind of the big theory would be androgenic alopecia, or also known as androgenetic alopecia. That's where the androgen is binding to the androgen receptor, causing gene transcription, and downstream to that, miniaturization, and the follicle is going to die and the stem cell will leave. So think of that as if you're thinking of your hair as like a lawn, grass and roots, kind of killing the roots, and then it leaves. And the grass blade might look a little bit smaller until the end. Then you have female pattern baldness. So that's related to estrogenic signaling. And if someone's on an androgen, even if it's before menopause, it can suppress the release of estrogen, but the androgen can also convert to estrogen. It's just depending on what the baseline profile is for that individual. Another example would be maybe hypothalamic amenorrhea, or POI, which is premature ovarian insufficiency, early menopause. So you have less estrogen signaling over time, and it leads to a thinning of the hair. And then kind of the last variety would be deficiency in growth agonists. So whether that's growth hormone or whether that's other endogenously produced peptides that help upregulate growth of the hair. That's another type. This would kind of go hand in hand with ischemic hair loss, where you have a lot of tension, and then you just have hypoxic tissue damage to the follicle. So in those three types, it's possible to have all three. It's possible to only have one. But in order to get maximum efficacy in a long term, this is like an investment. Your biggest bang for the buck in like the first month or two is going to be growth agonists like PRP, potentially peptides. Minoxidil is another one, latanoprost, which is kind of like Latisse. Those are all in the growth agonist category. The anti-androgen category, that'd be like ketoconazole, caffeine, spironolactone, 5-alpha reductase inhibitors like turmeric or even pumpkin seed oil, finasteride, dutasteride. And then as far as like the estrogen standpoint, usually it comes down to shifting the balance to estrogen or replacing different estrogens.
What is female pattern baldness?
It's diffuse thinning. So it's kind of like, think of it as poor quality of the hair, but also thinning and or loss of the hair in all areas of the scalp, not just
just like the temples,
frontotemporal and crown area. Yeah, it can be all over.
And that is a function of having just generally lower estrogens.
Yes, although treating with an anti-androgen often improves this. For example, if you treat someone with a topical dutasteride solution, their estrogens in the follicle themselves will go up like 10 or 20%. So often you can improve both with just one therapy.
Yeah, I bring this up. This is another, again, when we talk about our beautiful women going through menopause, as women, I think we have it's like our crown, right? It's like, it's part of our femininity. And in addition to some of our, secondary sex characteristics, let's say, but having a full head of hair, I think when that changes for women, it can be devastating. And so you can go on Instagram, as I have, admittedly, and sometimes you will see interventions that you're like, I'm not exactly sure where the science is to back this up. And I wanted to talk to you about things like scalp massage, as a way to maybe locally bring more blood into the area, and that might help with some of the potentially some of the female pattern baldness. And you've mentioned dutasteride, some of the other medications. One of the things that minoxidil, et cetera. One of the things that I see a lot is rosemary essential oil being either diluted in a carrier, being applied directly to the scalp itself, and then maybe massaged in. Is there any evidence to suggest that rosemary oil can compare to, let's see, minoxidil, finasteride, some of the things that we've been mentioning here?
Acutely, a lot of the interventions can help in the short run, but the main problem with scalp massage based techniques and essential oils, peppermint essential oil is actually my favorite one. But a lot of the issue with that is that it's very difficult to adhere to, and to keep it up over the course of many years can be also very difficult. And actually just taking a pill of minoxidil can be difficult, or applying topical minoxidil. Mm-hmm. And the amount of scalp massage needed to make a sustainable difference, it can improve the quality, but think about it's acting as a fertilizer, but the root is still damaged and can still have slow miniaturization. There's not a lot of studies on scalp massage or topical essential oils over a course of many years, but there is lots of studies on just minoxidil. And minoxidil will certainly help over the course of many years, but if there is an female pattern or male pattern baldness component to it, then after several years, the death of the hair follicle will still take place. So kind of the roots still die eventually. So my main takeaway would be, if there is a female pattern baldness or a male pattern, especially if there is a male pattern baldness component, making sure not to just use growth agonists and blood flow improvement.
Great. And where does iron status and maybe micronutrients play into the health of the hair follicle, and then just either the thickness of the hair itself, or preventing some of the male and female pattern baldness that we've been discussing?
Yeah, iron status and nutrients like biotin or zinc, they can certainly help improve the quality and thickness of hair. But the main thing that it does is it kind of changes the life cycle. So think of a life cycle. A hair lives, let's say, 100 human years on average, and then it dies and it's actually reincarnated. So it usually lives a very long time in what's called anagen phase and catagen phase, and then a very short time in what's called telogen phase. So if you're iron deficient or if you're thyroid deficient, it can go into what's called a telogen effluvium, which basically means a whole bunch of hairs abnormally just age to 100 years instantly and start to die and reincarnate. So they're not permanently dead, but they're kind of, the hair falls out. The stem cell is still in the follicle, but it's going to take it a month or two to start growing again. So very important for that reason. There's often a component of telogen effluvium to post-viral hair loss, which a lot of people have been asking me about recently.